It's a new day and abundance is here. My name is Bisola Miriam, and today I have a conference presentation to make. I'll be speaking on the topic, how do African student victims of domestic violence describe their experiences to their American counselors? So I'll be talking about these research proposal that I will be working on in the summer, and I will be using cultural theory as the theoretical framework for this study, and I cannot wait to share about my research. Let's go make magic. It's not only money we like book. It's not only food, we like book too. It's not only wearing BM's Kulina, digital marketing. We sabi book now, and we still fine. We can't come like to the dance. Now complete package. Abby, how you see him? See you on the other side. Hold on there.
Okay, we're doing shout outs, I see.
All good.
Okay, I hope everybody's having a good morning, and I apologize for all the sound dinging. I don't know how to turn all of it on. I haven't quite figured out how to turn all of it off, so sometimes it just dings when I'm in meetings. Maybe I'll do. Do not disturb. Okay. All right, perfect.
I also, like my colleague, am a qualitative researcher, methodologist. I also focus on the Frenchton, and Dr. Sanchez, we probably should have been better organized appearance with them, maybe in the future with Coco and Ollie as well.
Movement is political and that it works actively toward collective liberation. So everybody's included. It's not, a single movement. And I invite you to learn more about it, as well as about the original keepers of the lands in which you respectively live and conduct research today. So with that, I just like to take some time to lay out the general order of our session. So we'll go in the order of the papers that were sent via the email, but if you would prefer to go at a different point in the order, just let me know in the chat. So the order is currently in the chat box for everyone's reference. And during your time, you'll have about 10 to 12 minutes to share your work, and I'll notify you as discreetly. I don't know how, I still haven't figured out how we do that on Zoom, but I'll just unmute and I'll notify you that you'll have 2 minutes remaining. And then again, when the time is up. And everyone will have screen sharing privileges. So please just be sure to only share your screen when it's your turn. And also make sure that your mics, we've all been doing this for years at this point, but that your mics are muted unless you're addressing the group. And the chat, as always, will be open for your thoughts and comments and encouragements throughout the session. And after everyone is gone, Dr. Talbert will lead us in a discussion and will co-facilitate a Q&A and discussion portion of the session. So I encourage you to take notes during your colleagues' presentations or put it in the chat so that we can engage deeply during the latter part of our session. So does anybody have any questions at this time? Okay. And also, if it is all right, sorry, I just want to see. Okay. So if it's all right, Bisola, are you all right going first? Am I saying your name correctly? Also, this is another thing.
Okay. So it's Bisola Miriam.
Bisola Miriam.
Yeah, or you can call me BM. I think BM is easier.
Bisola's not super hard.
Well, I like the combination of Bisola Miriam, so people find it difficult calling both. So I came up with an easy option, which is BM.
Okay. Well, whatever you would like to be called, that's what we will call you. So, BM, are you all right going first?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Get it out of the way.
Perfect. So, the other thing I just wanted to ask and run by the group is if it would be all right to record the session. And if you do not want your particular presentation recorded, just again, shoot me a message on the chat and I'll make sure to pause the recording when it's your turn. So no big deal. So so with that, is it all right if I record?
Yeah.
Thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay, perfect. Okay, so BM, I have given share screen, and I have my timer. And
Awesome.
so whenever you're ready, feel free to share your screen and I will begin the recording
Okay.
right now. Recording in progress. Okay. And I'll mute myself and then I'll unmute at 2 minutes. So.
Okay, good morning, everyone. For context, I am Bisola Miriam and I'm Nigerian. I came to the United States in 2020, precisely on the 7th of December 2020. So think about the time in which I came into the States in the middle of a global pandemic, right? Leaving my family, my children, and all of my loved ones to come to grad school. Now, before I came into the US, I was working as a non-profit leader because I have a non-profit organization, the Left-Handers Africa organization. And I recall there was this day I was invited to speak at a public event where I shared my lived experience as someone who had grown up in a very toxic family setting. Now, I recall that after my interview, a lot of people called in and were sharing their personal experiences as victims of domestic violence and abuse. Now, that was my first experience with people who had my kind of experience as a victim of domestic violence and abuse. So I came into the US with different ideas, different thoughts, one of which was, how exactly do people describe their experiences? I never knew this was going to be an actual research idea or project that I was going to work on. Moving on, I did my first semesters, continued, and my work as a graduate student. Sometimes in the middle of my second semester, things began to go south between my partner and I, so much more that I was beginning to receive all kinds of toxic messages using digital platform. And then I knew I needed to seek counseling help because I couldn't separate my personal from my professional. I saw how I wasn't turning in my assignment well, my work wasn't going the way it should, right? And this makes me think about the ways in which sometimes even as researchers, especially those of us who come from different parts of the world, come into this country and then we somehow think that we can actually take away our identities, our experiences, and our personalities from the work that we do even as researchers. But living this and walking through this whole process made me see how I could not actually separate my personal from my professional. And then I began to think, even while I was in counseling, how exactly do people like me, right? People who are victims of domestic violence and abuse describe their experiences to their American counselors. In the course of my journey into counseling, one of the things I discovered was the fact that while I was able to get access to resources, there were a lot of limitations. One, because I am an international student, I only get to receive some stipend from the university, which is not a lot of money, and so I do not really have so much control over the options that I may decide to want to consider when it comes to counseling. So there were limitations in the kind of resources I could actually get access to. And another issue here is I am an international student, and so navigating or working with an American counselor who is also white was really challenging for me, especially because of my cultural background and the experiences that I have and the peculiarity of my circumstance. Peculiarity in the sense that I am here, but the person who is digitally abusing me isn't here. So that makes it even more complicated because walking into the domestic violence law clinic at the University of Alabama and the fact that there is no existing legal assistance framework that seems to cater for the needs of non-native victims of domestic violence and abuse is it's even a big problem. Now, I saw that there are limitations to how much I can do with regards to, engaging the law, the legal assistance framework, and so many other big issues. And so the one that I know can actually be put forward and be given adequate attention is what then led me to consider doing a research on this issue, which is how exactly do we describe our experiences? Perhaps if we are able to let the system or the policymakers understand the ways in which non-natives describe their experiences, especially African students, maybe that, of course, can lead to one, rethinking available legal assistance framework, two, making available more resources onto people like us, and three, the need to actually globally rethink what exactly abuse is, especially with the global pandemic. And so, having said that, I during the process, while I was going through available literature, I saw that many of the research that has been done are focused largely on the experiences of African Americans. Not much has been done on the experiences of Africans, especially African students. Now, so my study looks to explore using a co-cultural communicative practice, using co-cultural theory to kind of understand the ways in which non-native victims of domestic violence and abuse describe their experiences to their American counselors. So a little about why this study matters. Of course, I have talked so much about that already, but one thing that I would just like to also highlight here is the fact that as someone who is currently recovering from the trauma associated with both intimate partner violence and digital abuse specifically, and of course, organizational violence, when I think about the different roles that some outsiders have played in this whole process, makes me think about the fact that definitely we cannot separate the personal from the professional, and there is need for us not to gloss over the our mental health, even as individuals, as people who come from different parts of the world, even though there might be, when it comes to matters of mental health, I think it is important to forget about your cultural, beliefs and your social construct or identities, and of course take care of ourselves, which was something that I also discovered in this process, and I think it's important to highlight that moving forward. I'll move to the last slide. Okay, so for this study, as I wrap up, I am looking to engage from an interpretive paradigm because I want to understand the subjective experiences of other victims of domestic violence and abuse. And to do this, I would be using a qualitative approach. I will be conducting in-depth interviews in order to understand the experiences of African students who have interacted with different American counselors, as well as the perception of these counselors when relating with their African student clients. So using co-cultural theory, what exactly is co-cultural theory about? So co-cultural theory basically hinges on the idea that when minority group members or people with little or no societal power interact with dominant group members, they actually use certain communicative strategies in order to either dispel stereotypes or overcompensate or become more likable or try to be agreeable when interacting with people who have more societal powers. So for me, as an international student and of course an African student who lives only on stipend, it was an unconscious thing for me to constantly practice communicating in a way that was acceptable, in a way that was agreeable, in a way that kind of showed that I was constantly overcompensating, even without realizing it. So while that was something I discovered in the process, it would not do so much good for me to assume and totalize that that is actually how other non-native victims of domestic violence would, communicate. So it is important to actually do a holistic study to kind of understand how each and every body, or what is the peculiar way in which, each African student victim communicates when interacting with American counselors. Perhaps are there overlaps or are there differences in the ways in which they interact? So two big questions would guide my study. The first is, how do African student victims of DVA communicate their experiences to the American counselors? And I'll be engaging this using the theory that I already talked about, and I will be looking at the 26 different co-cultural communication practices that Hobby has introduced in order to really understand how this plays out in that kind of interaction. The second big question is, how do American counselors describe the communicative behaviors of African student victims of DVA when the latter describe their experiences? Considering the sensitive nature of the study, it is important to also state that I would do all I can to protect the participants from harm, knowing that this, of course, can be a very traumatizing, process for them, which, of course, I acknowledge as someone who is living and walking through that, process. So, in
2 minutes left.
2 minutes, yes, I'm wrapping
Yep.
up. So, in times of timeliness, I hope to do this within the next 6 months. And in terms of sample size, I hope to work with 12 participants. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts, and I hope this makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, BM. I just want to make sure I want to make sure I didn't cut you off, that you got the wrap up you needed. Sorry, I realize that's abrupt and I really have no way of controlling like this unmuting. So, all right. I believe we have Callista is going to go next. Am I saying your name right?
It's Khalifa.